If we want to understand the passions of the Middle East, my friends, think on these things. There are profoundly moving emotions connected to this place for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. But emotions can fuel many kinds of actions and attitudes. Emotions can fuel hatred and violence, as well as love and compassion. Religion also has to do with the passions of people. Colonel Harry Summers, who once taught at the War College in the United States, writes that war is rooted in the passions of people. Violence is rooted in the passions of people. If that is the case, and clearly I think he is correct, if that is the case, then those of us who care deeply for peace and for coexistence, it must also be rooted in the passions of the people, or it is not real. Peace must come from who we are. As I am a Christian, I speak out of that tradition. Now, I am one who disagrees with the general tendency, especially in 21st century American society, to blame religion for violence. I accept, however, that we can lay some blame on the wrong religion. The wrong religion is the religion of the state. The wrong religion is the religion of the nation. That religion, I would call us all to practice atheism in reference to the state, in reference to the nation, in reference to the false hope that a particular boundary, a particular border, is for us God's place. So one of the things I would like to invite us to think about is I'd like to invite us to think about being two things as people of faith, of many different faith traditions. Those two things that I'd invite us to think about is I'd invite us all to think about being atheists, and I'd like to invite us to think about being border runners. Now, contrary to what we normally hear, especially those of us living in Southern California, I want to talk this afternoon about the importance of violating borders. Indeed, I'll go much further than that. I would like to suggest, especially speaking as a Christian out of the biblical tradition, I would suggest that it is a biblical mandate in the modern world that we must learn to be border runners. I would argue, in fact, that as I read the Bible calls on those who treasure those writings to flagrantly violate borders in the name of peace and justice. And that any authentic theology built on those scriptures should be a theology that is true to the radicalism of that book, that calls on us to treat borders with suspicion in the best case, and to treat borders with open contempt in the worst. Now, obviously, as I said, living in Southern California, we are especially interested in borders. So it seems to me an interesting set of images for us to be thinking about. So what about that image about being atheists? Well, let's begin with borders again. We've heard so much about the border between the United States and Mexico that some have suggested that that particular border has become more than merely a border. It has become a symbol. It has become a symbol of privilege, a symbol of what we have and what others don't have, a symbol of keeping what is ours, a symbol of keeping people out with the wrong color of skin. Notice that very few volunteers today are carefully patrolling the borders of Canada. I would argue that the U.S.-Mexico border has become so powerful a symbol that it has become virtually a shrine, an idol. And when it comes to the gods that are represented by that idol, I proclaim myself an atheist. When it comes to the religion represented by that border, I proclaim myself an atheist. So what kind of atheist am I? Quite simply, I do not believe in the gods of the nation state, as if that is what is all important for us today. What kinds of gods are worshipped at the border shrine? The border god would have us believe that we have some kind of inherent rights over the resources of the earth, especially over poorer peoples and nations. The border gods would have us believe that we are allowed to dictate to others what we would never accept for ourselves. When it comes to these kinds of gods, I am an atheist. Now, I'm not particularly original using that image. It turns out that the first Christians were called atheists by the Romans because they refused to worship the gods of the Roman state. So what I'm calling for is a resurrection of early radical Christian atheism. Now, this kind of atheism, however, must be combined with a radical faith. So since I'm not talking about the U.S.-Mexico border particularly, what I'm thinking about is borders throughout the world, all those borders that separate humanity from one another, that encourage nationalism, that encourage hatreds, that encourage separations, and of course, ultimately war. Now, I recognize that sometimes borders can be a useful fiction. In the best sense, they can indicate differences between peoples and cultures and faiths that we respect and, in fact, that we can enjoy. So in the best cases, borders are merely friendly recognitions of differences in place, and we can honor those differences. However, borders, as we know, these imaginary lines that are drawn between people have a nasty habit of becoming excuses for bigotry, conflict, and ultimately for war. When this happens, I would argue that people of goodwill, people of faith from many different traditions, could benefit from reminding themselves that there are lessons from many of our traditions, and there are certainly lessons from the Bible, that would suggest that somebody needs to be willing to intentionally violate the borders that separate us. I would argue as a Christian that the Bible teaches that that somebody is us. We are called to violate borders. So what are the signs that borders are becoming dangerous? Well, danger signs are evident when people use borders to speak about the goodness of everyone on our side and the suspicions of everyone over there. Patriotism, for example, has tended in recent years to become a corrupted and self-righteous arrogance toward people outside our borders. I believe it's time for people of goodwill, and I would argue, especially for those who treasure the Bible, to become suspicious of all this talk of protecting our borders when it is spoken with